Question 1. The investigation demonstrates a significant and persistent decline in team productivity and an increase in project delays within a key department. Senior leadership is demanding immediate explanations and corrective actions. The HR department is tasked with understanding the contributing factors and recommending a path forward, considering the recent implementation of a new performance management system that includes elements similar to the Korn Ferry assessment framework for evaluating leadership and team dynamics. Which of the following approaches best addresses the situation while adhering to professional best practices and ethical considerations? Option A. Immediately identify and address individuals whose performance metrics appear to be the lowest, implementing disciplinary actions to signal the seriousness of the situation and encourage a rapid turnaround. Option B. Rely on informal feedback from managers and anecdotal observations to quickly pinpoint the perceived causes of the productivity decline and implement broad, top-down changes without a formal assessment. Option C. Delegate the entire assessment process to an external consultant without providing them with detailed internal context or establishing clear objectives, expecting them to deliver a complete solution independently. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of individual performance records and team project outputs, utilizing the structured assessment tools within the new performance management system to identify specific areas of underperformance and potential skill gaps, followed by targeted development plans, and where necessary, performance improvement plans. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of individual performance records and team project outputs, utilizing the structured assessment tools within the new performance management system to identify specific areas of underperformance and potential skill gaps, followed by targeted development plans, and, where necessary, performance improvement plans. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for swift action with the imperative to conduct a thorough and unbiased assessment. The Korn Ferry assessment, in this context, is not merely a procedural step, but a critical tool for understanding the root causes of the performance issues and identifying appropriate interventions. The pressure to deliver immediate results can lead to shortcuts that undermine the integrity of the assessment process, and consequently, the effectiveness of any subsequent actions. Careful judgment is required to ensure the assessment is comprehensive, objective, and aligned with the organization's strategic goals and ethical standards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and data-driven methodology, which is fundamental to effective problem-solving and talent management. By engaging all relevant stakeholders and utilizing a structured assessment framework, the organization ensures that the evaluation is holistic, fair, and provides actionable insights. This aligns with ethical principles of transparency and due process, and regulatory expectations for fair and objective performance evaluations. It allows for the identification of systemic issues rather than just individual performance, leading to more sustainable solutions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate disciplinary action, without a proper assessment, fails to address the underlying causes of the performance issues. This is ethically problematic, as it can lead to unfair penalization of individuals whose performance may be impacted by factors outside their direct control, such as inadequate training, poor management, or systemic organizational deficiencies. It also represents a failure in professional due diligence, as it bypasses a critical step in understanding the problem. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal biases to inform the assessment is professionally unacceptable due to its inherent subjectivity and lack of objectivity. This can lead to discriminatory practices and erodes trust within the organization. Ethically, it violates principles of fairness and impartiality. A third incorrect approach that outsources the entire assessment without clear oversight or integration with internal knowledge risks a superficial understanding of the organizational context. While external expertise can be valuable, a complete abdication of responsibility can lead to recommendations that are not practical or culturally appropriate, failing to deliver genuine improvement. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Clearly defining the problem and its scope. 2. Identifying the relevant assessment tools and methodologies, like the Korn Ferry assessment. 3. Ensuring objectivity and fairness by involving diverse perspectives and data sources. 4. Communicating the process and findings transparently to stakeholders. 5. Developing and implementing evidence-based solutions. 6. Monitoring the effectiveness of interventions and making adjustments as needed. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and ultimately lead to positive organizational outcomes. Question 2. Benchmark analysis indicates that a company is experiencing a plateau in innovation and a lack of diverse leadership within its senior ranks. The HR department is tasked with identifying high-potential employees for a new leadership development program designed to address these issues. The available data includes recent performance reviews, project success rates, and informal feedback from managers. What is the most effective approach to identifying these individuals for the program? Option A. Rely primarily on the quantitative data from performance reviews and project success rates, prioritizing individuals who have consistently achieved the highest scores in these areas over the past 3 years. Option B. Ask each department head to nominate their top 3 most promising employees based on their personal judgment and knowledge of their teams. Option C. Conduct a series of structured interviews and assessment centers, incorporating behavioral event interviews and simulations, and convene a calibration session with a diverse panel of senior leaders to discuss and validate findings. Option D. Initiate a broad talent review meeting where all managers present their team members' achievements, with the final selection made by the Chief Human Resources Officer based on the overall volume of positive mentions. The correct answer is C. Conduct a series of structured interviews and assessment centers, incorporating behavioral event interviews and simulations, and convene a calibration session with a diverse panel of senior leaders to discuss and validate findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent subjectivity in interpreting performance data and the potential for bias in talent assessment. The pressure to identify high-potential individuals for critical roles necessitates a rigorous and objective approach, yet the data itself can be incomplete or misleading. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of assessment methodologies and a commitment to fairness and accuracy, especially when significant career implications are at stake. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted evaluation that moves beyond simple quantitative metrics. It prioritizes a holistic view by incorporating qualitative feedback, behavioral observations, and a structured discussion among assessors. This aligns with best practices in talent management, which emphasize the need for diverse data points to mitigate individual biases and ensure a comprehensive understanding of an individual's capabilities and potential. This approach is ethically sound as it promotes fairness and provides a more accurate reflection of an individual's suitability for advancement, thereby supporting equitable development opportunities. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on past performance metrics, ignoring developmental potential or behavioral competencies. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to account for future adaptability and leadership qualities, potentially overlooking individuals who have demonstrated growth or possess latent potential. Ethically, it can lead to a lack of diversity in leadership pipelines and perpetuate a cycle of rewarding only those who have historically excelled in specific, potentially narrow ways. Another incorrect approach relies heavily on the subjective opinions of a single senior leader without corroborating evidence or a structured assessment process. This is professionally unsound as it introduces significant personal bias and lacks the objectivity required for fair talent evaluation. It creates an environment where favoritism can thrive, undermining trust and meritocracy. Regulatory frameworks often implicitly or explicitly require fair and transparent processes for talent management, which this approach violates. A third incorrect approach involves prematurely categorizing individuals based on initial impressions or limited data, without further investigation or discussion. This is professionally detrimental as it can lead to hasty and inaccurate judgments, potentially mislabeling individuals and hindering their career progression. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adhere to a robust assessment methodology, which is crucial for maintaining credibility and ensuring equitable treatment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach talent assessment with a framework that emphasizes objectivity, fairness, and thoroughness. This involves 1. Defining clear assessment criteria aligned with role requirements and organizational strategy. 2. Utilizing a variety of data sources, including performance reviews, 360-degree feedback, psychometric assessments, and behavioral interviews. 3. Implementing a structured calibration process, where multiple assessors discuss and reconcile their evaluations to minimize individual bias. 4. Documenting the rationale behind all assessment decisions to ensure transparency and accountability. This systematic approach ensures that talent decisions are defensible, equitable, and contribute to the long-term success of both the individual and the organization. Question 3. Performance analysis shows a significant decline in a team member's output and quality of work over the past quarter, yet the team member expresses strong satisfaction with their role and believes they are performing well. As a manager, what is the most appropriate initial step to address this discrepancy? Option A. Accept the team member's self-assessment as accurate and disregard the performance analysis, assuming the data may be flawed. Option B. Postpone the discussion indefinitely, hoping that the team member's performance will improve on its own without direct intervention. Option C. Immediately issue a formal warning to the team member, citing the performance analysis as the sole basis for disciplinary action. Option D. Schedule a private meeting with the team member to discuss the specific findings of the performance analysis, present objective examples, and actively listen to their perspective and any contributing factors they identify. The correct answer is D. Schedule a private meeting with the team member to discuss the specific findings of the performance analysis, present objective examples, and actively listen to their perspective and any contributing factors they identify. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in performance management where objective data, performance analysis, conflicts with subjective perceptions or potential biases. The challenge lies in ensuring fairness, accuracy, and adherence to organizational policies and ethical standards when addressing performance discrepancies. It requires a nuanced approach that balances the need for objective evaluation with the human element of employee development and feedback. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, data-driven, and empathetic process. It begins with a thorough review of the performance analysis to identify specific areas of concern and gather supporting evidence. This is followed by a private, constructive conversation with the employee, presenting the findings objectively and allowing them to provide their perspective. The focus should be on understanding the root causes of the performance gap, collaboratively developing an action plan with clear goals and timelines, and offering appropriate support and resources. This approach aligns with best practices in performance management, emphasizing fairness, transparency, and employee development, which are implicitly supported by general principles of good governance and ethical conduct in professional settings. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately implement disciplinary action based solely on the performance analysis without further investigation or dialogue. This fails to acknowledge the possibility of external factors influencing performance, misinterpretations of data, or the need for additional training or support. Ethically, it can be seen as punitive and unfair, potentially leading to employee disengagement and legal challenges if not handled according to established procedures. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the performance analysis entirely and rely solely on the employee's subjective explanation without seeking to reconcile the discrepancy. This undermines the integrity of the performance management system and can create a perception of favoritism or a lack of accountability. It fails to address potential performance issues that could impact team productivity and organizational goals. A third incorrect approach is to avoid the conversation altogether, hoping the issue resolves itself. This is a dereliction of managerial duty and can lead to the escalation of performance problems, negatively affecting team morale and overall business outcomes. It also fails to provide the employee with the necessary feedback and support for improvement, which is a core responsibility of a manager. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach performance discrepancies by first ensuring the data is accurate and relevant. They should then engage in open, honest, and empathetic communication with the employee, focusing on understanding the situation from all angles. The goal is to identify solutions collaboratively, support employee growth, and maintain a fair and productive work environment, all while adhering to organizational policies and ethical guidelines. Question 4. Strategic planning requires a nuanced understanding of how candidate assessment tools, such as the Korn Ferry assessment, should inform hiring decisions. When evaluating a candidate's profile, what is the most professionally sound and ethically compliant approach to integrating the assessment results into the overall selection process? Option A. Immediately disqualify candidates who score below a predetermined threshold in any single competency area of the assessment, regardless of their performance in other areas or overall qualifications. Option B. Use the Korn Ferry assessment results as the sole basis for making a hiring decision, as it is designed to provide a definitive measure of a candidate's fit. Option C. Prioritize the candidate's highest scoring competency from the assessment as the primary determinant for suitability, assuming this indicates their strongest potential contribution. Option D. Interpret the Korn Ferry assessment results holistically, considering them as one component among several data points, e.g., experience, interview performance, to form a comprehensive understanding of the candidate's suitability for the role. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the candidate's highest scoring competency from the assessment as the primary determinant for suitability, assuming this indicates their strongest potential contribution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where a candidate must navigate the ethical and regulatory landscape of talent assessment, specifically concerning the Korn Ferry assessment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the organization's desire for efficient candidate evaluation with the imperative to ensure fairness, accuracy, and compliance with assessment best practices and any applicable data privacy regulations. Misinterpreting or misapplying assessment results can lead to discriminatory hiring practices, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions. The pressure to make quick decisions based on assessment data, without a thorough understanding of its limitations or appropriate interpretation, heightens the need for careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a holistic and ethically sound interpretation of the Korn Ferry assessment results. This involves recognizing that the assessment is a tool to provide insights, not definitive judgments. Best professional practice dictates that results should be considered alongside other relevant information, such as experience, qualifications, and interview performance. This approach aligns with the ethical principles of fairness and objectivity in selection processes. Furthermore, it respects the integrity of the assessment methodology by using it as intended to inform, not dictate, hiring decisions. This also implicitly adheres to principles of data protection and responsible use of candidate information, ensuring that assessments are not used in a way that could lead to unfair bias or discrimination, which is a cornerstone of many employment regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that relies solely on a single, high-scoring competency from the Korn Ferry assessment to justify a hiring decision, while overlooking other critical areas or candidate attributes, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This is a form of over-reliance on a single data point, which can lead to a biased selection process and potentially violate anti-discrimination laws by not considering the candidate holistically. It also fails to acknowledge the inherent limitations and potential for error in any assessment tool. Another incorrect approach involves dismissing a candidate based on a single, lower-than-expected score in one area of the Korn Ferry assessment, without further investigation or consideration of mitigating factors. This can lead to the exclusion of potentially strong candidates who may excel in other areas or whose development potential is not captured by that specific metric. Ethically, this is unfair and can lead to missed opportunities for the organization. From a regulatory standpoint, it could be seen as an arbitrary or discriminatory basis for rejection if not properly justified and validated against job requirements. Finally, an approach that involves sharing raw, uninterpreted Korn Ferry assessment scores with individuals not trained in their interpretation or without a legitimate need to know is a breach of data privacy and professional ethics. This can lead to misinterpretation, gossip, and a violation of candidate confidentiality, potentially contravening data protection regulations and undermining trust in the assessment process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a balanced and informed approach to talent assessment. This involves 1. Understanding the purpose and limitations of the specific assessment tool being used, e.g., Korn Ferry assessment. 2. Integrating assessment data with other sources of information, e.g., CV, interviews, references, to form a comprehensive view of the candidate. 3. Ensuring that assessment interpretation and application are fair, objective, and free from bias. 4. Adhering to all relevant data privacy and employment regulations. 5. Consulting with HR or assessment specialists when in doubt about interpretation or application. This systematic process ensures that decisions are defensible, ethical, and contribute to building a diverse and capable workforce. Question 5. The control framework reveals that a candidate for a critical leadership role has completed a significant portion of the Korn Ferry assessment remotely, but the system logs indicate intermittent network connectivity issues during their session, potentially affecting data integrity. The assessment administrator is aware of these logs, but has not yet verified the candidate's experience or the impact of the connectivity issues on the assessment's validity. What is the most appropriate next step for the administrator? Option A. Disqualify the candidate based on the potential for compromised assessment data without further investigation. Option B. Immediately proceed with scoring and interpreting the assessment results, assuming the data is sufficiently reliable for decision-making. Option C. Contact the candidate to understand their experience during the assessment and investigate the technical logs further to assess the potential impact on data integrity before proceeding. Option D. Manually adjust the assessment scores to account for the perceived impact of the connectivity issues. The correct answer is B. Immediately proceed with scoring and interpreting the assessment results, assuming the data is sufficiently reliable for decision-making. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient data collection with the imperative of maintaining data integrity and adhering to regulatory expectations for assessment validity. The Korn Ferry assessment, like many psychometric tools, relies on standardized administration and scoring to ensure that results are comparable and meaningful. Deviations from the prescribed methodology can compromise the reliability and validity of the assessment, leading to potentially flawed insights about candidates. This can have significant implications for hiring, development, and talent management decisions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the integrity and validity of the assessment data. By seeking clarification and adhering to the established protocols for data handling and interpretation, the professional ensures that the Korn Ferry assessment is used as intended. This aligns with the ethical obligations of assessment practitioners to use tools responsibly and to provide accurate and unbiased information. Furthermore, it demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance, as many jurisdictions have guidelines or laws governing the fair and accurate use of assessment tools in employment contexts, even if not explicitly detailed in this prompt. The underlying principle of fair assessment is universally recognized. An incorrect approach that involves altering the data collection process without proper authorization or understanding of the implications would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a breach of data privacy if candidate information is mishandled, or a violation of assessment standards if the data is no longer representative of the candidate's true capabilities. Such actions could also contravene principles of fairness and equal opportunity, as biased or inaccurate assessment data can lead to discriminatory outcomes. For instance, if the assessment is used for promotion, altering data could unfairly disadvantage some employees. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the discrepancy and proceeding with the assessment as if no issue exists, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold the standards of assessment practice. It risks generating misleading results that could inform poor talent management decisions, impacting both the organization and the individuals involved. This approach neglects the professional responsibility to ensure the quality and trustworthiness of the assessment process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Identify the discrepancy or issue. Clearly recognize what deviates from the expected or prescribed procedure. 2. Consult relevant documentation and protocols. Refer to the Korn Ferry assessment guidelines, company policies, and any applicable regulatory frameworks. 3. Seek clarification from authoritative sources. Engage with the assessment provider, internal HR/talent management leads, or legal counsel if necessary. 4. Evaluate the impact of the discrepancy. Understand how the issue might affect the validity, reliability, fairness, and compliance of the assessment. 5. Determine the most appropriate course of action. Based on the evaluation, decide whether to proceed with caution, seek remediation, or halt the process. 6. Document the decision and rationale. Maintain a record of the issue, the steps taken, and the justification for the chosen course of action. Question 6. The control framework reveals that a new strategic initiative aimed at increasing market share has the potential to introduce significant operational risks due to the rapid onboarding of new third-party vendors. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and robust risk management principles? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for vendor risk assessment to the individual business units responsible for onboarding, assuming they have sufficient expertise to manage these risks independently. Option B. Integrate a risk assessment and control validation process for all new third-party vendors into the onboarding workflow, ensuring that critical controls are in place before significant operational reliance is established. Option C. Halt the strategic initiative until a comprehensive review of all potential vendor risks and the development of new, stringent vendor control policies can be completed. Option D. Prioritize the rapid onboarding of vendors to meet the strategic initiative's timeline, with a plan to review vendor controls retrospectively once the initiative is underway. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the rapid onboarding of vendors to meet the strategic initiative's timeline, with a plan to review vendor controls retrospectively once the initiative is underway. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between achieving organizational objectives and adhering to established control frameworks, particularly when those objectives might inadvertently create control gaps or encourage risk-taking behavior. The need for robust regulatory compliance, as mandated by the Korn Ferry Assessment's guiding principles, requires a proactive and integrated approach to risk management and control design. Careful judgment is essential to ensure that performance metrics do not incentivize actions that undermine the integrity of the control environment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the identification and remediation of control weaknesses before they can be exploited or lead to noncompliance. This aligns with the fundamental principles of regulatory frameworks that emphasize a strong control environment as a cornerstone of operational integrity and risk mitigation. By actively seeking to understand the control implications of strategic initiatives and embedding control considerations into the planning phase, professionals demonstrate a commitment to proactive risk management and adherence to the spirit and letter of regulatory requirements. This approach fosters a culture of compliance and accountability, ensuring that business objectives are pursued within acceptable risk parameters. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the achievement of performance targets without considering the control environment would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to a breach of regulations by creating an environment where controls are bypassed or ignored in the pursuit of results. Such an approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the established governance structures designed to protect the organization and its stakeholders. Ethically, it prioritizes short-term gains over long-term stability and compliance, potentially exposing the organization to reputational damage, financial penalties, and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing controls reactively, only after an issue has been identified, is also professionally unacceptable. This reactive stance fails to meet the proactive requirements of most regulatory frameworks, which expect organizations to anticipate and mitigate risks. It suggests a lack of foresight and a failure to embed controls into the operational fabric of the organization, increasing the likelihood of future control failures and non-compliance. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of proposed actions against the organization's control framework and relevant regulatory requirements. This includes 1. Understanding the objective and its potential impact on existing controls. 2. Identifying any control gaps or weaknesses that the objective might create or exacerbate. 3. Assessing the level of risk associated with these gaps. 4. Developing and implementing appropriate control measures to mitigate identified risks. 5. Regularly reviewing and testing the effectiveness of these controls. This iterative process ensures that business objectives and regulatory compliance are pursued in tandem, fostering a resilient and compliant operational environment. Question 7. Implementation of the Korn Ferry assessment for a new leadership development program requires careful consideration of its validity and potential impact. Which of the following approaches best ensures regulatory compliance and ethical application? Option A. Implement the assessment and then gather informal feedback from participants and managers to gauge its perceived effectiveness, making adjustments based on subjective opinions. Option B. Proceed with the assessment as recommended by the vendor, assuming its widespread use implies inherent validity and fairness for all roles. Option C. Conduct a thorough validation study to confirm the assessment's predictive validity for leadership competencies and assess for any adverse impact on protected groups, with a plan to address any identified issues. Option D. Utilize the assessment scores as the sole determinant for program selection, prioritizing candidates who score highest, without further investigation into the assessment's specific relevance to the program's objectives. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough validation study to confirm the assessment's predictive validity for leadership competencies and assess for any adverse impact on protected groups, with a plan to address any identified issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between achieving organizational objectives and adhering to ethical and regulatory standards when implementing a new assessment tool. The Korn Ferry assessment, like any psychometric tool, requires careful validation and application to ensure it is fair, reliable, and legally defensible. The challenge lies in balancing the desire for efficient talent identification with the imperative to avoid discriminatory practices or the use of invalid measures. Careful judgment is required to ensure the assessment process is not only effective, but also compliant with relevant employment laws and ethical guidelines concerning assessment validity and fairness. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based methodology for implementing the Korn Ferry assessment. This involves a thorough validation process to ensure the assessment accurately measures the desired job-related competencies and does not disproportionately disadvantage any protected group. It also emphasizes ongoing monitoring and feedback to identify and address any unintended consequences. This aligns with regulatory requirements for fair employment practices and ethical standards for the responsible use of assessment tools, ensuring that decisions are based on merit and objective criteria, thereby minimizing legal risk and promoting a more equitable workplace. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the perceived efficiency of the assessment without proper validation fails to meet regulatory and ethical standards. This could lead to discriminatory outcomes if the assessment inadvertently screens out qualified candidates from protected groups, violating equal employment opportunity laws. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or superficial alignment with job descriptions, rather than robust psychometric validation, risks using an invalid tool. This not only undermines the integrity of the hiring process, but also exposes the organization to legal challenges based on the use of an unfair or unreliable assessment. A third incorrect approach that ignores potential adverse impact and proceeds with implementation without any review or mitigation strategy demonstrates a disregard for ethical responsibilities and regulatory obligations to ensure fairness in selection processes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific purpose and context of the assessment. This involves researching and selecting assessment tools that have established validity and reliability for the target roles. The next step is to conduct a thorough validation study tailored to the specific organizational context and job requirements, to confirm the assessment's predictive validity and to assess for adverse impact. If adverse impact is identified, appropriate steps must be taken to mitigate it, which may include revising the assessment, adjusting cutoff scores, or using supplementary selection methods. Continuous monitoring and periodic revalidation are crucial to ensure the assessment remains effective and compliant over time. Question 8. System analysis indicates that a company is considering implementing the Korn Ferry assessment for a senior leadership role. The HR department has received a general overview of the assessment's capabilities, but has not conducted an in-depth review of its psychometric properties or its specific relevance to the unique demands of the senior leadership position within their organization. The primary driver for adoption is the assessment's reputation for identifying high-potential individuals. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible and compliant approach to integrating this assessment into the selection process? Option A. Modify the scoring interpretation of the Korn Ferry assessment to align with the hiring manager's pre-existing perceptions of ideal leadership qualities for the role, to expedite the decision-making process. Option B. Conduct a thorough validation study to ensure the Korn Ferry assessment measures competencies directly relevant to the senior leadership role and to assess its potential for adverse impact on protected groups before full implementation. Option C. Proceed with using the Korn Ferry assessment as a primary selection tool, relying on its established reputation and interpret the results based on general industry benchmarks for leadership roles. Option D. Utilize the Korn Ferry assessment as a supplementary tool, primarily for candidate engagement, and make the final hiring decision based on traditional interview performance and resume review alone. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough validation study to ensure the Korn Ferry assessment measures competencies directly relevant to the senior leadership role and to assess its potential for adverse impact on protected groups before full implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for efficient talent acquisition and the imperative to adhere to regulatory frameworks governing assessment processes. The Korn Ferry assessment, as a tool, is designed to evaluate candidate suitability, but its application must be scrupulously aligned with the principles of fairness, objectivity, and non-discrimination, as mandated by relevant employment laws and ethical guidelines. The challenge lies in ensuring that the assessment process, while aiming to identify the best fit, does not inadvertently create barriers or biases that could lead to discriminatory outcomes or a breach of compliance. Careful judgment is required to balance the utility of the assessment with the legal and ethical obligations to treat all candidates equitably. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic and compliant integration of the Korn Ferry assessment into the recruitment lifecycle. This involves a thorough understanding of the assessment's psychometric properties, its intended use, and its alignment with the specific job requirements. Crucially, it necessitates a review of the assessment's validity and reliability in the context of the role and the candidate pool, ensuring it measures relevant competencies without introducing bias. This approach is ethically sound as it promotes fairness and equal opportunity, and it is legally compliant by mitigating risks of adverse impact and discrimination claims. It reflects a commitment to evidence-based selection and responsible HR practices. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the assessment's perceived prestige or a superficial understanding of its purpose would be professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to conduct due diligence and could lead to the use of an assessment that is not fit for purpose or is discriminatory. Such an approach risks violating employment laws that prohibit discrimination based on protected characteristics, as the assessment might inadvertently disadvantage certain groups. Ethically, it undermines the principle of meritocracy and fair selection. Another incorrect approach that involves adapting the assessment criteria or interpretation based on subjective impressions or external factors, rather than the established psychometric properties and job relatedness, is also professionally unsound. This introduces bias and compromises the objectivity of the selection process. It deviates from best practices by prioritizing intuition over evidence, potentially leading to the selection of less qualified candidates and the rejection of more suitable ones, thereby failing to meet the organization's talent needs and potentially creating legal liabilities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of any assessment tool. This includes understanding its theoretical underpinnings, its psychometric properties, validity, reliability, its intended application, and its potential for adverse impact. Professionals should consult relevant legal and ethical guidelines, seek expert advice if necessary, and ensure that the assessment process is transparent, objective, and job-related. A continuous review and validation process should be in place to ensure the ongoing effectiveness and fairness of the assessment. Question 9. Investigation of a candidate's suitability for a senior compliance officer role involves reviewing their performance on a proprietary Korn Ferry assessment designed to gauge ethical reasoning and regulatory awareness. The candidate achieved a score that, while passing, is not in the top quartile. The hiring manager is considering recommending the candidate based on their extensive experience, but is hesitant due to the assessment score. What is the most professionally sound approach to evaluating this candidate's fitness for the role? Option A. Conduct a follow-up interview specifically designed to explore the candidate's understanding of key compliance principles and their approach to ethical dilemmas, using scenarios relevant to the role, and cross-reference their responses with the assessment's findings. Option B. Focus solely on the candidate's previous employment history and references. Disregarding the Korn Ferry assessment results as a potentially unreliable measure of compliance capability. Option C. Accept the candidate's extensive experience as sufficient to override the assessment score, assuming that practical application will compensate for any theoretical gaps identified by the test. Option D. Immediately disqualify the candidate based on the assessment score, as it indicates a potential deficiency in regulatory awareness that cannot be overcome by experience alone. The correct answer is A. Conduct a follow-up interview specifically designed to explore the candidate's understanding of key compliance principles and their approach to ethical dilemmas, using scenarios relevant to the role, and cross-reference their responses with the assessment's findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where an individual is tasked with evaluating a candidate's suitability for a role that requires a high degree of ethical conduct and adherence to regulatory standards. The challenge lies in discerning genuine understanding and commitment to compliance from superficial knowledge, especially when the assessment tool itself is designed to probe these areas. The pressure to make an accurate recommendation, coupled with the potential consequences of a poor hire, regulatory breaches, reputational damage, financial penalties, necessitates careful judgment and a robust evaluation methodology. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted assessment that goes beyond simply reviewing the candidate's performance on a standardized Korn Ferry assessment. It requires understanding the underlying principles of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct that the assessment aims to measure. Best professional practice dictates that the assessment results should be interpreted in the context of the candidate's broader experience, behavioral indicators, and their ability to articulate how they would apply compliance principles in real-world situations. This approach aligns with regulatory expectations that organizations must demonstrate due diligence in hiring and ensuring that employees understand and uphold compliance obligations. It reflects a commitment to fostering a culture of integrity, which is a cornerstone of regulatory frameworks designed to prevent misconduct. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the numerical score of the Korn Ferry assessment without further inquiry. This fails to acknowledge that standardized tests can have limitations and may not fully capture an individual's nuanced understanding or practical application of compliance principles. It represents a regulatory failure by not conducting a thorough assessment of the candidate's fitness for a role with compliance responsibilities, potentially leading to the appointment of an individual who may not possess the necessary ethical compass or practical knowledge. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the assessment results entirely based on a single, potentially minor, perceived anomaly without investigating further. This can lead to overlooking genuine concerns about a candidate's understanding of compliance or ethical behavior. Ethically, it is irresponsible to ignore potential red flags that could impact the organization's compliance posture. From a regulatory perspective, this approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence in the hiring process, as it fails to adequately scrutinize information that could indicate a risk to the organization's adherence to laws and regulations. A third incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the candidate's past disciplinary record, disregarding the insights provided by the Korn Ferry assessment. While past conduct is relevant, it does not provide a complete picture of a candidate's current understanding or commitment to compliance. This approach risks overlooking a candidate who may have learned from past mistakes and demonstrated significant growth, or conversely, a candidate with a clean record, but a poor understanding of current compliance requirements as revealed by the assessment. This represents a failure to utilize all available, relevant information in the assessment process, potentially leading to an incomplete and biased evaluation, which is contrary to best practices in regulatory compliance hiring. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a holistic and investigative approach when evaluating candidates for roles with compliance responsibilities. This involves 1. Understanding the specific compliance risks associated with the role and the organization. 2. Utilizing assessment tools like the Korn Ferry assessment as one component of a broader evaluation strategy. 3. Conducting behavioral interviews to probe for practical application of compliance principles and ethical decision-making. 4. Verifying information through references and background checks. 5. Documenting the entire evaluation process to demonstrate due diligence. This systematic approach ensures that hiring decisions are informed, defensible, and contribute to maintaining a strong compliance culture. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows a candidate being asked to identify and assess the primary risks associated with a new strategic initiative. The candidate is provided with a high-level project brief but limited detailed operational data, which approach best demonstrates a robust risk assessment capability. Option A. Conducting an exhaustive analysis of every conceivable minor risk, regardless of its potential impact or likelihood, to ensure no possibility is overlooked. Option B. Systematically identifying potential risk categories, assessing the likelihood and impact of key risks within those categories, and proposing proportionate mitigation strategies, while noting any assumptions made due to data limitations. Option C. Relying primarily on personal experience and intuition to gauge the most significant risks without a structured framework for analysis. Option D. Focusing exclusively on the most immediately apparent risks mentioned in the brief, without exploring secondary or interconnected risks. The correct answer is B. Systematically identifying potential risk categories, assessing the likelihood and impact of key risks within those categories, and proposing proportionate mitigation strategies, while noting any assumptions made due to data limitations. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a candidate is presented with a complex risk assessment task within the context of the Korn Ferry assessment framework. The professional challenge lies in discerning the most appropriate approach to risk assessment when faced with incomplete or ambiguous information, requiring a nuanced understanding of how to balance thoroughness with practicality. This scenario demands careful judgment to avoid both overanalysis leading to paralysis and underanalysis leading to significant oversight. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, iterative process that acknowledges uncertainty. It involves identifying key risk drivers, assessing their potential impact and likelihood, and then developing mitigation strategies. This aligns with standard risk management principles and the implicit expectations of a comprehensive assessment tool like Korn Ferry, which aims to evaluate a candidate's ability to think critically and strategically about potential challenges. The emphasis on documenting assumptions and seeking clarification when needed demonstrates a commitment to accuracy and transparency, crucial for professional integrity and effective decision-making. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on identifying the most obvious risks without considering their interdependencies or potential cascading effects fails to meet the depth expected in a professional assessment. This can lead to a superficial understanding of the risk landscape and the development of inadequate mitigation plans. Ethically, it represents a failure to exercise due diligence. Another incorrect approach that involves overanalyzing every minor potential risk to the point of losing sight of the most significant threats is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of prioritization and strategic thinking, potentially wasting valuable resources and time. It can also indicate an inability to make decisive judgments under pressure, a key competency assessed by Korn Ferry. A further incorrect approach that relies heavily on intuition or anecdotal evidence without a systematic framework for evaluation is problematic. While experience is valuable, professional risk assessment requires a data-informed and structured methodology. Relying solely on gut feeling can introduce bias and overlook critical, less obvious risks, leading to potential regulatory or ethical breaches if these risks materialize. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve, first, clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. Second, employing a systematic methodology to identify potential risks. Third, analyzing the likelihood and impact of identified risks. Fourth, developing appropriate response strategies. And fifth, continuously monitoring and reviewing the risk landscape. When faced with ambiguity, professionals should actively seek clarification and document any assumptions made. Question 11. Market research demonstrates a growing demand for innovative financial products. A financial institution is preparing to launch a new, complex investment fund. The risk assessment team is tasked with identifying and evaluating potential risks associated with this launch. Which of the following approaches would best align with regulatory expectations for a thorough and effective risk assessment? Option A. Forming a quick scan of industry news and competitor offerings to identify any widely publicized risks, and then focusing the assessment on the most sensationalized potential negative scenarios. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive review of historical data for similar products, consulting with subject matter experts across relevant departments, and employing a structured methodology to assess both the likelihood and potential impact of identified risks, prioritizing those with the highest potential for adverse outcomes. Option C. Relying primarily on the personal experience and intuition of the senior management team to gauge the most significant risks, without extensive data collection or formal analysis. Option D. Developing a detailed risk register that lists every conceivable risk, no matter how improbable or minor, and dedicating equal resources to analyzing each one to ensure no stone is left unturned. The correct answer is B. Conducting a comprehensive review of historical data for similar products, consulting with subject matter experts across relevant departments, and employing a structured methodology to assess both the likelihood and potential impact of identified risks, prioritizing those with the highest potential for adverse outcomes. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for comprehensive risk assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources, all while adhering to regulatory expectations for thoroughness. The individual is tasked with identifying potential risks associated with a new product launch, a critical step in ensuring compliance and mitigating future issues. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate depth and breadth of the risk assessment without becoming bogged down in exhaustive, potentially unproductive detail. Careful judgment is required to prioritize risks that are most likely to occur and have the most significant impact. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on a structured, evidence-based methodology for risk identification and evaluation. This aligns with regulatory expectations that risk assessments should be systematic and proportionate to the nature and scale of the activity. By considering both the likelihood and impact of identified risks, and by documenting the rationale for prioritization, the professional demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to proactive risk management. This approach ensures that resources are allocated effectively to address the most critical threats, thereby safeguarding the organization and its stakeholders, and fulfilling regulatory obligations for robust risk management frameworks. An incorrect approach that involves a superficial review of readily available information without deeper investigation fails to meet regulatory standards for risk assessment. Such an approach risks overlooking significant, albeit less obvious, threats, leading to potential compliance breaches and financial or reputational damage. It demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and an abdication of responsibility to thoroughly understand the risk landscape. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most extreme, low-probability, high-impact risks, while ignoring more common, moderate risks, is also professionally unacceptable. This narrow focus can lead to a misallocation of resources, leaving the organization vulnerable to more probable threats that could still have a substantial negative effect. It fails to provide a balanced and comprehensive view of the risk profile. Finally, an approach that relies heavily on anecdotal evidence or personal opinion without seeking objective data or expert consultation is professionally unsound. This subjective method is prone to bias and is unlikely to identify all relevant risks or accurately assess their potential impact, thereby failing to meet the objective standards required by regulatory bodies for risk assessment. Professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the scope and objectives of the assessment. 2. Identifying relevant risk categories and potential sources of risk. 3. Employing a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods where appropriate, prioritizing data-driven insights. 4. Evaluating risks based on likelihood and impact and considering existing controls. 5. Documenting the entire process, including assumptions and limitations. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment as circumstances change. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates that the current risk assessment framework for emerging technological threats lacks specific granular detail regarding the potential impact of AI-driven disinformation campaigns on market stability. What is the most appropriate next step to address this identified gap? Option A. Rely on existing general risk assessment procedures, assuming that the current framework is sufficient to capture unforeseen threats and monitor for any immediate negative consequences. Option B. Initiate a targeted, in-depth risk assessment specifically focused on AI-driven disinformation, involving subject matter experts to define potential scenarios, assess likelihood and impact, and identify appropriate mitigation strategies. Option C. Immediately implement broad cybersecurity enhancements across all systems, assuming that general technological improvements will inherently address the specific risk of AI-driven disinformation. Option D. Conduct a brief survey of industry peers to gauge their perceived risk levels related to AI-driven disinformation, and use their responses as the primary basis for any necessary adjustments. The correct answer is B. Initiate a targeted, in-depth risk assessment specifically focused on AI-driven disinformation, involving subject matter experts to define potential scenarios, assess likelihood and impact, and identify appropriate mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk assessment with the imperative of thoroughness and compliance. The governance review has identified a potential gap, and the task is to determine the most appropriate next step. The challenge lies in selecting an approach that is both effective in addressing the identified risk and adheres to established professional standards and regulatory expectations without overcommitting resources unnecessarily. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, evidence-based methodology for risk assessment. This involves clearly defining the scope, identifying relevant stakeholders, and employing appropriate tools and techniques to gather and analyze information. Such a systematic process ensures that the assessment is comprehensive, objective, and defensible, aligning with the principles of good governance and risk management expected by regulatory bodies. It allows for a nuanced understanding of the risk's nature, likelihood, and impact, leading to more informed decision-making. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate mitigation without a proper assessment fails to address the root cause and may lead to inefficient or ineffective controls. This could be a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the requirement for a due diligence process in understanding and quantifying risk before implementing countermeasures. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or superficial checks lacks the rigor necessary for a robust risk assessment. This would be an ethical failure, as it demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and could expose the organization to unforeseen risks, potentially violating duties of care. A third incorrect approach that involves an overly broad and unfocused investigation without clear objectives would be professionally inefficient and could lead to wasted resources, potentially indicating a failure in strategic planning and resource allocation, which can have indirect regulatory implications if it leads to a failure to manage material risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the nature of the identified issue. This involves clarifying the scope and objectives of any subsequent action. Next, they should identify and evaluate potential approaches based on their alignment with professional standards, regulatory requirements, and organizational objectives. This evaluation should consider the effectiveness, efficiency, and ethical implications of each approach. Finally, professionals should select the approach that offers the most robust and defensible path forward, ensuring that it is well documented and communicated to relevant stakeholders. Question 13. The analysis reveals potential vulnerabilities in the administration of the Korn Ferry assessment, specifically concerning the clarity of instructions provided to candidates and the consistency of the testing environment across different locations. Which approach to risk assessment best addresses these identified concerns? Option A. Focus on documenting every minor deviation from the ideal testing condition, regardless of its potential impact on assessment outcomes. Option B. Develop a comprehensive risk register that categorizes potential issues based on their likelihood and impact on assessment validity and fairness, with a focus on actionable mitigation strategies for instruction clarity and environmental consistency. Option C. Prioritize identifying and mitigating risks related to the assessment platform's software updates and data security protocols. Option D. Assume that candidates will adapt to any minor inconsistencies in instructions or testing environments due to their inherent problem-solving abilities. Correct answer is C. Prioritize identifying and mitigating risks related to the assessment platform's software updates and data security protocols. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for comprehensive risk assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources, all while adhering to the specific guidelines of the Korn Ferry assessment framework. The assessor must identify potential risks that could impact the validity or fairness of the assessment outcomes without overanalyzing minor or improbable issues. Careful judgment is required to prioritize risks that are material and actionable. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on identifying risks that are directly related to the assessment's design, administration, and interpretation. Aligning with the Korn Ferry assessment's objective of providing reliable and valid insights into candidate capabilities. This approach ensures that the assessment process is robust and that the conclusions drawn are defensible, thereby upholding the ethical obligation to provide fair and accurate evaluations. It demonstrates a commitment to the principles of psychometric integrity and professional conduct expected within assessment frameworks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical specifications of the assessment platform, without considering the human element of administration or candidate experience, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from an incomplete risk identification, neglecting potential biases or procedural errors that could arise during the actual assessment delivery. It also represents a regulatory failure by not adhering to the comprehensive risk management expectations inherent in assessment standards, which typically encompass both technical and operational aspects. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes identifying every conceivable minor deviation from ideal conditions, regardless of its actual impact on the assessment's validity, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and an inability to distinguish between significant risks and trivial issues. Ethically, it can lead to wasted resources and an undue focus on minutiae, potentially distracting from more critical risk mitigation efforts. It also fails to meet the practical requirements of a timely and efficient assessment process. Third incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about candidate behavior or external factors without any supporting evidence or a clear rationale for their potential impact is professionally unsound. This approach introduces speculative risks that are not grounded in observable data or established assessment principles. It represents an ethical failure by introducing unsubstantiated concerns that could unfairly influence the assessment process or its interpretation, potentially leading to biased outcomes. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach to risk identification, assessment, and mitigation. This begins with understanding the specific objectives and context of the assessment. Next, potential risks should be brainstormed, considering all stages of the assessment lifecycle. These risks should then be evaluated based on their likelihood and potential impact. Finally, appropriate mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented, with a focus on those risks that pose the greatest threat to the assessment's validity, fairness, and reliability, in accordance with the Korn Ferry assessment framework. Question 14. System analysis indicates that a recent Korn Ferry assessment for a high-potential employee highlights significant strengths in strategic thinking and problem-solving, but also flags a moderate concern regarding interpersonal communication. Given the employee's upcoming promotion to a leadership role that will require extensive team collaboration, what is the most prudent next step in the risk assessment process? Option A. Initiate a targeted development plan focusing on enhancing interpersonal communication skills, while also exploring opportunities for the employee to practice these skills in low-stakes team interactions. Option B. Disregard the interpersonal communication finding as a potential anomaly in the assessment and proceed with the promotion without further intervention. Option C. Accept the assessment's findings at face value and proceed with the promotion, assuming the employee will naturally improve their communication over time. Option D. Immediately reassign the employee to a more individual contributor role to mitigate the risk associated with their communication style. The correct answer is A. Initiate a targeted development plan focusing on enhancing interpersonal communication skills, while also exploring opportunities for the employee to practice these skills in low-stakes team interactions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the potential for that information to be incomplete or misleading. The Korn Ferry assessment, as a tool, is designed to provide insights into an individual's capabilities and potential. However, relying solely on a single, potentially biased, or narrowly focused assessment without corroboration can lead to flawed decision-making in critical areas like talent development or strategic resource allocation. The pressure to act quickly on the assessment's findings adds to the complexity, demanding a judgment call on the sufficiency of the data. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves recognizing the limitations of any single assessment tool and seeking to validate its findings through multiple sources. This aligns with best professional practice in talent management and risk assessment. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to fairness and accuracy, ensuring that decisions are based on a comprehensive understanding of an individual's strengths and development areas, rather than a potentially incomplete snapshot. This approach mitigates the risk of misjudging potential or overlooking critical development needs, which could have long-term negative consequences for both the individual and the organization. It reflects a principle of due diligence in information gathering and decision-making. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately implement development plans based solely on the assessment's highest-rated competencies, assuming these are the only areas requiring attention. This fails to acknowledge that assessments can have blind spots or may not capture the full spectrum of an individual's skills in a real-world context. It risks overlooking areas of potential weakness or underestimating the importance of lower-rated competencies that might be crucial for future roles. Ethically, this could lead to an individual being pigeonholed or not receiving the holistic development they need. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the assessment entirely due to a single perceived anomaly or a minor discrepancy with existing knowledge. This disregards the potential value of the assessment as a structured evaluation tool and may stem from personal bias or an unwillingness to consider feedback that challenges pre-existing assumptions. Professionally, this misses an opportunity for objective insight and could lead to decisions based on incomplete or subjective information, potentially hindering talent growth. A third incorrect approach is to focus only on the assessment's lowest-rated competencies and solely assign remedial training, ignoring the strengths identified. This creates a negative development focus and fails to leverage the individual's existing capabilities. It can demotivate the individual and lead to a narrow, unbalanced development plan that doesn't capitalize on their full potential. Ethically, it can be seen as a failure to support the individual's overall growth and contribution. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach assessment data with a critical yet open mind. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the purpose and limitations of the assessment tool. 2. Corroborating findings with other data points, such as performance reviews, 360-degree feedback, or direct observation. 3. Considering the context of the individual's role and future career aspirations. 4. Developing a balanced development plan that addresses both strengths and areas for growth, informed by a holistic view. This iterative process ensures that decisions are robust, fair, and aligned with organizational and individual goals. Question 15. Research into the effectiveness of a new strategic initiative has yielded a significant amount of preliminary data, some of which appears contradictory. When conducting a risk assessment for this initiative, what is the most appropriate approach to ensure the assessment is both comprehensive and accurate? Option A. Seek expert opinions that align with the most striking preliminary data points to quickly validate potential risks. Option B. Rely primarily on the initial batch of data, assuming it represents the most immediate and relevant risks. Option C. Prioritize gathering additional verified data from diverse sources to corroborate or refute the preliminary findings before drawing conclusions. Option D. Focus on the most alarming pieces of preliminary data to immediately identify potential high-impact risks. The correct answer is C. Prioritize gathering additional verified data from diverse sources to corroborate or refute the preliminary findings before drawing conclusions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the potential for that information to be incomplete or misleading, thereby impacting the accuracy of a risk assessment. The Korn Ferry assessment, in its approach to risk assessment, emphasizes the importance of a comprehensive and objective evaluation. The challenge lies in discerning between readily available, potentially superficial data and the deeper, more nuanced insights that are crucial for a robust risk profile. Careful judgment is required to avoid drawing conclusions based on insufficient evidence, which could lead to misinformed strategic decisions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the acquisition of verified and relevant data for forming conclusions. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and professional skepticism inherent in effective risk management frameworks. By seeking out multiple sources and corroborating information, the individual demonstrates a commitment to accuracy and a thorough understanding of the assessment's purpose. This methodical approach minimizes the likelihood of overlooking critical risk factors or overestimating the significance of minor ones, thereby ensuring the integrity of the assessment and its subsequent recommendations. Ethically, This demonstrates a commitment to providing a reliable and unbiased assessment. An incorrect approach that relies solely on readily available, unverified information fails to meet the standards of professional diligence. This could lead to a superficial risk assessment that does not accurately reflect the true risk landscape. Such an approach may violate ethical obligations to provide competent and thorough service, potentially exposing the organization to unforeseen risks due to a flawed understanding of its vulnerabilities. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on the most alarming or easily identifiable risks, while ignoring less obvious but potentially more impactful ones, demonstrates a lack of comprehensive analysis. This selective focus can create a skewed perception of risk, leading to misallocation of resources and ineffective mitigation strategies. This also represents a failure in professional duty to conduct a balanced and complete assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to information gathering and analysis. This includes clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment, identifying potential data sources, critically evaluating the reliability and relevance of each source, and actively seeking out information that may challenge initial assumptions. Professionals should employ a process of triangulation, where information from multiple sources is compared and contrasted to build a more accurate picture. When faced with incomplete information, the professional judgment should be to acknowledge the limitations and, if possible, seek further clarification or data, rather than proceeding with a potentially flawed assessment. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that a candidate's Korn Ferry assessment results indicate a potential development area in strategic thinking, while their interview performance and previous project outcomes suggest strong strategic capabilities. The hiring manager is eager to extend an offer quickly. What is the most professionally sound approach to making a hiring decision in this situation? Option A. Conduct a follow-up discussion with the candidate specifically to explore their approach to strategic challenges, referencing examples from their past work, and seeking to understand how they perceive their development area in relation to their demonstrated successes. Option B. Proceed with extending the offer based on the strong interview performance and project outcomes, disregarding the assessment's indication of a development area in strategic thinking. Option C. Extend the offer to the candidate, but immediately place them on a performance improvement plan focused on strategic thinking, based solely on the assessment's indication. Option D. Delay the hiring decision indefinitely until further, more in-depth psychometric testing can be conducted to definitively confirm or refute the assessment's findings. The correct answer is A. Conduct a follow-up discussion with the candidate specifically to explore their approach to strategic challenges, referencing examples from their past work and seeking to understand how they perceive their development area in relation to their demonstrated successes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent subjectivity in evaluating candidate potential and the need to ensure fairness and objectivity in the assessment process. The Korn Ferry assessment, like many psychometric tools, aims to provide objective insights, but its interpretation and application require careful judgment to avoid bias and ensure it aligns with the specific requirements of the role and the organization's values. The pressure to make a timely decision, coupled with the potential for differing interpretations of assessment results, necessitates a structured and ethically sound approach. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic review of the assessment data in conjunction with other relevant information, such as interview performance and past experience. This multifaceted evaluation ensures that a candidate's potential is understood within a broader context, mitigating the risk of over-reliance on a single data point. It adheres to ethical principles of fairness and due diligence by seeking to understand the why behind the assessment results and considering how they translate to on-the-job performance. This aligns with best practices in talent acquisition, which emphasize a comprehensive and evidence-based decision-making process. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on a single, potentially negative data point from the assessment without further investigation or contextualization is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a discriminatory outcome if the assessment metric is not directly and demonstrably job-related, or if it inadvertently penalizes candidates for factors unrelated to their ability to perform the role. It fails to meet the ethical obligation to assess candidates fairly and objectively. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the assessment data entirely without a valid, documented reason is also professionally unsound. This undermines the investment in the assessment tool and may lead to decisions based on intuition or personal preference rather than objective insights, potentially overlooking valuable information about a candidate's fit and potential. This approach risks making decisions that are not grounded in evidence and could lead to suboptimal hiring outcomes. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, making a decision based on a superficial review of the assessment, is ethically problematic. It suggests a lack of commitment to the rigor required in talent assessment and could result in overlooking critical nuances in a candidate's profile, leading to poor hiring decisions and potential future performance issues. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the purpose and limitations of the assessment tool. 2. Reviewing the assessment results in conjunction with all other available candidate information, interviews, references, experience. 3. Identifying any discrepancies or areas requiring further exploration. 4. Seeking clarification or additional data if necessary. 5. Making a final decision based on a balanced and objective evaluation of all evidence, ensuring it aligns with the role's requirements and organizational values. Question 17. The efficiency study reveals that a significant portion of operational costs is attributed to the extensive manual verification processes required for customer onboarding, which are designed to meet stringent Know Your Customer (KIC) regulations. The study suggests that automating a substantial part of this verification, while potentially reducing compliance oversight, could lead to considerable cost savings. What is the most appropriate course of action for the organization? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the proposed automation solutions to ensure they fully meet and, where possible, exceed all current KYC regulatory requirements, and consult with legal and compliance teams to validate the integrity of the automated processes before implementation. Option B. Implement a partial automation of the verification process, focusing only on the elements that are least likely to impact regulatory compliance and deferring more complex automation until a later date. Option C. Immediately proceed with implementing the automation solutions that offer the highest cost savings, assuming that regulatory bodies will be understanding of efficiency-driven changes in onboarding processes. Option D. Engage a third-party vendor to streamline the manual verification process without automation, arguing that the current manual system, while costly, is demonstrably compliant and less risky than introducing new automated systems. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the proposed automation solutions to ensure they fully meet, and where possible, exceed all current KYC regulatory requirements, and consult with legal and compliance teams to validate the integrity of the automated processes before implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the drive for operational efficiency with the imperative of maintaining robust regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The Korn Ferry assessment in this context is not merely a tool for identifying areas of improvement, but also a mechanism that can inadvertently highlight potential compliance gaps or ethical dilemmas if not interpreted and acted upon with due diligence. The core challenge lies in translating data-driven insights into actionable strategies that uphold legal and ethical standards, rather than simply pursuing cost reduction at any expense. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based review of the efficiency study's findings in the context of existing regulatory frameworks and ethical guidelines. This involves a multidisciplinary assessment, engaging legal, compliance, and operational teams to understand the implications of any identified inefficiencies. By seeking to understand the root causes of these inefficiencies and developing solutions that are compliant and ethical, the organization demonstrates a commitment to responsible business practices. This proactive and integrated approach ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the cost of regulatory breaches or ethical compromises, thereby safeguarding the organization's reputation and long-term sustainability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on implementing the most cost-effective solutions identified by the study, without a comprehensive compliance review, risks significant regulatory and ethical failures. For instance, if an identified inefficiency stems from a process that, while costly, is mandated by a specific regulation, e.g., data privacy protocols, anti-money laundering checks, bypassing or altering this process for cost savings would constitute a direct violation of that regulation. Ethically, such an approach could lead to a culture where compliance is seen as an obstacle to efficiency, fostering an environment where shortcuts are encouraged, potentially leading to more serious misconduct. Another incorrect approach might involve selectively implementing recommendations that are easy to achieve and offer immediate cost benefits, while ignoring those that require more complex compliance checks or ethical considerations. This selective implementation can create an uneven compliance landscape and may signal a lack of genuine commitment to ethical operations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, risk-based approach. First, thoroughly understand the findings of the efficiency study and their potential implications. Second, conduct a comprehensive assessment of each finding against relevant regulatory requirements and ethical principles. This should involve consulting with legal and compliance experts. Third, prioritize actions based on risk, addressing the most critical compliance and ethical issues first. Fourth, develop and implement solutions that are both efficient and compliant, ensuring that all stakeholders are aware of and adhere to the new processes. Finally, establish ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms to ensure sustained compliance and ethical conduct. Question 18. To address the challenge of ensuring a Korn Ferry assessment genuinely contributes to strategic talent management, which evaluation approach best demonstrates professional best practice? Option A. Verifying that all employees have completed the assessment within the designated timeframe and that the assessment is administered according to the provider's guidelines. Option B. Relying on the reputation of Korn Ferry as a leading assessment provider to conclude that the assessment is inherently effective in driving talent outcomes. Option C. Measuring participant satisfaction with the assessment process and the perceived fairness of the questions asked. Option D. Assessing the extent to which the assessment data has been actively used to inform individual development plans, succession planning decisions, and performance management feedback. Correct answer is D. Assessing the extent to which the assessment data has been actively used to inform individual development plans, succession planning decisions, and performance management feedback. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in evaluating the effectiveness of a Korn Ferry assessment's application within a specific organizational context. The core difficulty lies in moving beyond a superficial understanding of the assessment's purpose to a critical analysis of its actual impact on talent management decisions. Professionals must discern whether the assessment is merely a procedural step or a genuinely integrated tool that drives strategic outcomes. This requires a nuanced understanding of how assessment data should inform development plans, succession planning, and performance management, and the ability to identify when these connections are weak or absent. The challenge is amplified by the potential for confirmation bias, where stakeholders might interpret results in a way that aligns with pre-existing beliefs, rather than objectively assessing the assessment's contribution. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves evaluating the Korn Ferry assessment's impact by examining its direct influence on tangible talent management outcomes. This means looking for evidence that the assessment data has been used to 1. Identify specific development needs for individuals, leading to targeted training or coaching. 2. Inform succession planning by highlighting potential successors with the right competencies. And 3. Contribute to performance management discussions by providing objective insights into strengths and areas for growth. This approach is best practice because it aligns with the fundamental purpose of talent assessments: to improve decision-making and drive organizational effectiveness. It moves beyond simply administering a test to ensuring that the insights gained are actionable and lead to measurable improvements in talent pipelines and individual performance. This aligns with ethical principles of responsible assessment use, ensuring that assessments are not just for compliance, but for genuine development and strategic advantage. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on the administrative aspects of the Korn Ferry assessment, such as completion rates or the perceived fairness of the process by participants. This is professionally unacceptable because it ignores the assessment's intended purpose of generating actionable insights. Regulatory and ethical guidelines for assessments emphasize their utility in informing decisions, not just their procedural execution. Focusing on completion rates without analyzing how the data is used fails to meet this standard. Another incorrect approach is to assume the assessment is effective simply because it is a well-regarded tool from a reputable provider like Korn Ferry. This is a failure of critical evaluation. Professional practice demands an objective assessment of the tool's application and impact within the specific organizational context, regardless of the provider's reputation. Relying on the brand name without verifying its effectiveness is a lapse in due diligence and can lead to misallocation of resources and ineffective talent strategies. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize anecdotal feedback from participants about their personal experience, with the assessment over evidence of its impact on talent decisions. While participant feedback is valuable, it is not a direct measure of the assessment's effectiveness in driving strategic talent outcomes. Professionally, the focus must remain on how the assessment contributes to the organization's talent objectives, not just individual perceptions. This can lead to a misinterpretation of success, where a pleasant experience masks a lack of meaningful impact on talent management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a results-oriented approach when evaluating talent assessments. This involves defining clear metrics for success that are tied to talent management objectives before the assessment is implemented. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the assessment's intended purpose and how it aligns with organizational strategy. 2. Establishing a framework for how the assessment data will be integrated into talent processes, e.g., development planning, succession. 3. Collecting data on the actual use of the assessment insights and their correlation with talent outcomes. And 4. Critically analyzing this data to determine the assessment's effectiveness and identify areas for improvement. This systematic approach ensures that assessments are not merely performative, but are genuine drivers of talent development and organizational success. Question 19. Analysis of the Korn Ferry assessment suitability for a specific leadership development program requires a comprehensive evaluation that goes beyond its general popularity. What approach best demonstrates professional best practice in determining its efficacy for this particular context? Option A. Conducting an internal pilot study of the Korn Ferry assessment with a representative sample of current leaders, collecting feedback on its relevance and perceived fairness, and analyzing its correlation with existing performance data. Option B. Relying on testimonials from HR professionals who have used the Korn Ferry assessment and are satisfied with the results. Option C. Assuming the assessment is effective because it is a well-known and reputable tool in the talent management space. Option D. Reviewing industry reports and case studies that highlight the Korn Ferry assessment's widespread adoption and perceived success in other organizations. The correct answer is D. Reviewing industry reports and case studies that highlight the Korn Ferry assessment's widespread adoption and perceived success in other organizations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to critically evaluate the effectiveness and appropriateness of a widely adopted assessment tool within a specific organizational context. The challenge lies in moving beyond superficial acceptance of a tool's popularity or perceived validity, and instead conducting a rigorous, evidence-based assessment of its suitability for the intended purpose and its alignment with best practices in talent management and assessment. This requires a nuanced understanding of psychometric principles, organizational needs, and ethical considerations in assessment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven evaluation of the Korn Ferry assessment's alignment with specific organizational objectives and its psychometric soundness. This involves considering factors such as predictive validity for the roles in question, fairness and equity across diverse candidate pools, and the practical implications of its implementation. By focusing on these elements, the professional ensures that the assessment tool is not only widely used, but also demonstrably effective and ethically administered, thereby maximizing its value and minimizing potential risks of bias or misinterpretation. This aligns with professional standards that emphasize evidence-based decision-making and a commitment to fair and valid assessment practices. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the assessment's widespread adoption or the reputation of the provider fails to meet professional standards. This approach is ethically flawed because it prioritizes external validation over internal relevance and effectiveness, potentially leading to the use of a tool that is not optimal for the organization's specific needs or may inadvertently introduce bias. Relying on anecdotal evidence or superficial reviews also bypasses the critical due diligence required to ensure the assessment is fit for purpose and ethically sound. Such an approach risks misallocating resources, making suboptimal hiring or development decisions, and potentially facing challenges related to fairness and compliance if the assessment proves to be discriminatory or invalid in practice. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Define the specific objectives for using the assessment tool. What outcomes are you trying to achieve? 2. Research the assessment tool's psychometric properties, including validity, reliability, and fairness. 3. Evaluate the tool's alignment with the organization's culture, values, and specific job requirements. 4. Consider the practical aspects of implementation, including cost, training requirements, and integration with existing HR systems. 5. Seek feedback from stakeholders, including those who will administer the assessment and those who will be assessed. 6. Make a decision based on a comprehensive evaluation of all relevant factors, prioritizing evidence and ethical considerations. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a careful balance between stakeholder aspirations and organizational integrity. Imagine a scenario where a senior executive, a key stakeholder in the strategic planning process, strongly advocates for a new market entry strategy. This executive has significant influence and is eager to present a bold, rapid expansion plan to the board. However, preliminary internal analysis suggests that this aggressive timeline and scope may expose the organization to considerable operational and regulatory risks that have not been fully quantified. The executive is resistant to delaying the plan or significantly scaling it back, emphasizing the need for immediate action to capture market share. What is the most professionally responsible approach to navigate this situation? Option A. Immediately approve the executive's rapid expansion plan to maintain stakeholder goodwill and avoid potential conflict, assuming the executive's experience will mitigate unforeseen issues. Option B. Inform the executive that their plan is too risky and recommend abandoning the market entry altogether without further investigation or discussion of alternatives. Option C. Proceed with the executive's rapid expansion plan, but instruct the relevant departments to discreetly monitor for potential problems without formally documenting or reporting risks to the executive or board. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and scenario planning exercise to fully understand the potential downsides of the proposed strategy. Present these findings objectively to the executive and the board, and propose a phased approach with built-in risk mitigation measures. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and scenario planning exercise to fully understand the potential downsides of the proposed strategy. Present these findings objectively to the executive and the board, and propose a phased approach with built-in risk mitigation measures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in strategic planning, where a highly influential stakeholder advocates for a course of action that, while potentially offering short-term gains, carries significant long-term risks and may not align with the organization's core values or regulatory obligations. The challenge lies in balancing stakeholder expectations with prudent risk management and ethical conduct, particularly when the stakeholder's influence could lead to pressure to overlook potential negative consequences. Careful judgment is required to assess the true impact of the proposed strategy beyond immediate financial projections. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, data-driven assessment of the proposed strategy's risks and benefits, considering all relevant factors including regulatory compliance, ethical implications, and long-term sustainability. This includes engaging in open dialogue with the stakeholder to understand their rationale, presenting objective findings, and proposing alternative solutions that mitigate risks while still addressing the underlying business need. This aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing responsible decision-making, upholding fiduciary duties, and ensuring adherence to the Korn Ferry assessment's emphasis on integrity and strategic foresight. It demonstrates a commitment to evidence-based decision-making and a proactive approach to risk management, which are foundational to effective leadership and governance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately adopting the stakeholder's proposal without independent verification or risk assessment. This fails to uphold professional responsibility by potentially exposing the organization to significant regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and financial losses. It bypasses critical due diligence and demonstrates a lack of independent judgment, which is a core expectation in professional roles. This approach could lead to violations of internal policies and external regulations that mandate risk assessment and responsible business conduct. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the stakeholder's proposal outright without a proper evaluation or attempt at constructive dialogue. While the proposal may have flaws, a complete rejection without understanding the stakeholder's underlying objectives or exploring potential modifications can damage relationships and miss opportunities for innovation. This approach lacks the professional maturity to engage in collaborative problem-solving and can be perceived as insubordinate or dismissive, hindering effective strategic alignment. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the proposal, but attempt to conceal or downplay the identified risks to the stakeholder. This is ethically unsound and creates a false impression of security. It violates principles of transparency and honesty, and if discovered, can lead to severe consequences, including legal repercussions and a complete loss of trust. This approach directly contravenes the ethical standards expected in professional environments, which demand candor and accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first seeking to understand the full context and objectives behind the stakeholder's proposal. This is followed by a rigorous, objective analysis of all potential impacts, utilizing available data and expertise. The next step involves transparent communication with the stakeholder, presenting findings clearly and respectfully, and collaboratively exploring solutions. If the proposal remains problematic, professionals must be prepared to articulate the rationale for alternative strategies or modifications, grounded in risk mitigation, ethical considerations, and long-term organizational health. This structured approach ensures that decisions are well-informed, defensible, and aligned with the highest professional standards.